A powerful magnitude 7.7 earthquake has torn through eastern Indonesia. The death toll has climbed past 51, with dozens more injured, entire villages buried under landslides, and rescue teams racing against time. Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX Deep Dive. I'm Shivani Singh. In this episode of Deep Dive, we will break down all about the Indonesia earthquake, what happened, how the rescue operation is currently unfolding, and why this region keeps getting hit again and again. Well, it struck at 5:58 in the morning local time on Saturday, August 15th. A magnitude 7.7 earthquake hit off the coast of Flores Island in East Nusa Tenggara province, Indonesia. The epicenter was about 68 kilometers north-northwest of the city of Ende at a shallow depth of just 10 kilometers. And that shallow depth is exactly why the shaking was so violent. Survivors described sheer terror. One woman, jolted awake at 5:30 in the morning over 100 kilometers from the epicenter, said it felt like being on a trampoline. The quake didn't come alone. More than 230 aftershocks rattled the island throughout the day, the strongest measuring magnitude 6.2. Authorities initially issued a tsunami warning, sending thousands fleeing to higher ground on foot, on motorbikes and packed into pickup trucks. That warning was later lifted after monitoring showed no dangerous sea level changes. But the damage on land was already catastrophic. As of the latest count, the death toll from Indonesia's Disaster Mitigation Agency, BNPB, it stands at 51, with roughly 50 injured. Most of the casualties were concentrated in three devastated regencies of Sikka, Manggarai and East Manggarai. The physical destruction is staggering. At least 346 houses have been damaged, 157 of them severely, along with 87 educational facilities, 18 health facilities, 5 places of worship and 6 government offices. And officials are warning that this number is not final. Landslides triggered by the shaking have buried or completely cut off remote villages across 6 regencies on Flores Island. Some communities are simply gone from the view, buried, with no word yet on how many people are still inside. This is where the story is unfolding right now, a race against time, complicated by geography, weather and broken infrastructure. Indonesia's national search hosts local responders alongside roughly 100 mobile brigade corps personnel and additional specialized response units sent directly to Flores. Police dog units were also deployed to help locate survivors trapped beneath the rubble. But reaching the hardest hit areas has been brutal. The rescue chief in Maumere, Father Rahman, has described crews finding 20 dead and 6 injured in that. Why is there a delay? The answer is landslides. Flores' interior is mountainous, connected by a limited road network, and the shakes and you get a disaster response operating partially blind, unsure of the full scale of what's happened in the most isolated villages. To get around the blocked roads, relief supplies, food, medical aid, shelter materials are being flown in from a logistics warehouse in East Flores. Commercial flights into the province have been cancelled to prioritize emergency and relief traffic. International help has already started arriving too. real-time Earth observation data that can help identify buried villages and damaged infrastructure from orbit, guiding ground teams to where they are needed the most. Officials have been blunt. They reveal a further, fuller and grimmer picture. Here's the question everyone asks after every one of on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a zone of intense volcanic and tectonic activity positioned right at the meeting point of the Eurasian, Pacific and Australian tectonic plates. This ring is one of the most seismically active areas on the planet, forming a horseshoe that stretches from Japan and Indonesia on one side of the Pacific all the way to California and South America on the other. Flores specifically sits in a geological pressure cooker. The area contains both strike-slip faults and thrust faults, including something called as the Flores back thrust, formed where the Indo-Australian plate is being forced underneath the Eurasian plate. In plain terms, massive slabs of the Earth's crust are constantly grinding against and diving beneath each other here. That process doesn't happen smoothly. It happens in sudden, violent jolts, which is exactly what the world just witnessed. In February, and a magnitude 7.3 to 7.4 quake near North Makulu in April that damaged over 450 structures. This is the rhythm of life on the Ring of Fire, and it's why Indonesia, spread across more than 17,000 islands, remains one of the most earthquake-exposed nations on Earth. Today, in the villages of Flores, families are digging through what used to be their homes with their bare hands. But this is also the story of a nation that has learned, disaster after disaster, how to move. Well, let's take this discussion forward with Mr. Vishal Pathak, who is a senior coordinator of the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. Thank you so much, Mr. Pathak, for taking out your time and for speaking to NewsX. Very good evening to you.
Thank you, Shivani. Good evening.
Mr. Pathak, I want to understand from you, obviously we are looking at a disaster. There is a golden period of rescue and relief operations that everyone looks forward to achieving the most in that time, and also the fact that we are again talking about Indonesia, which sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. We cannot obviously change the position geologically, but what can be done to avoid the destruction that unfolds after disaster strikes?
Thank you, Shivani. Since you have already shared the immediate updates from Indonesia, perhaps I can add what you asked about the disaster risk and preparedness perspective. The first thing to understand is that what has happened in Indonesia is serious, yes, but geologically it is not unexpected. And we often hear this term ring of fire, as you explained, that very, is a useful geographically description for the Australian plate, Eurasian plate, as well as also Pacific plates. So interact in and around the Indonesia country, along with several smaller tectonic systems. So BMKG, which is Indonesian authority itself, identifies this tectonic setting as a fundamental reason for Indonesia's high earthquake exposure. There is another distinction that I think it is very important. The earthquake is a natural hazard, but we should be careful about calling the result disaster a natural disaster, which is very much important. The question you have asked is, let's call it natural hazard. It results into disaster when our development efforts is not, safe. And here, in this case, our National Disaster Management Authority of India, as well as United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, which support the implementation of the Sendai framework globally, puts this very clearly. Hazard may be natural, but disaster are not. So a hazard becomes a disaster when it meets exposure and vulnerability. In this case, as you said about the citizen of Indonesia are exposed to the earthquake risk. So people, houses, schools, hospitals, roads, and livelihoods that are exposed and insufficiently protected. This does not mean blaming anybody after a tragedy. In fact, it gives us more hopeful message. We cannot control tectonic plates, but we can reduce disaster risk. I would like to
Right, Mr.
share.
Pathak.
Yes,
Please go
Sivan.
ahead, Mr. Pathak. I want to also understand from you, Mr. Pathak, because people usually say that earthquakes don't kill, infrastructure does. The kind of infrastructure that can actually prevent such destruction from going forward. So how do we go about that, sir?
So of course, that infrastructure kills, and infrastructure, it's not naturally built. It's done by the society, human, and our machines and that. So we have to be, it is not due, it is more about before earthquake than during and after earthquake. How, the lesson is that countries facing known earthquake risk have to continuously live with that risk intelligently. So the science tells us where the hazard is. In the case of India, it is, as we know, Andaman and Nicobar, Kashmir, Northeast region. So, and same way, as you explain about the entire ring of fire from Pacific, US to Indonesia, Japan, and the whole entire region. So the science tells us where the hazard is. Now, monitoring tells us what is happening, as you share, in this case, Indonesian authorities saying that what is going on, where it is going on, how it is going on, and tsunami early warning was given immediately after some time and then lift out after 3 hours or so. So that's monitoring tells us what is happening. So early warning can sometimes give us precious seconds. In the case of earthquake, as we know, the lesson from the Venezuela earthquake, and safe infrastructure can reduce collapse. So it is more about before earthquake, how our preparedness planning, how our safe infrastructure, how our preparedness planning at household level, at business level, inside house, how our education system in build about these lessons is very much important. And trusted public institution can turn this scientific information into action. So that is the very much. This is also closely connected with the work of Avoidable Deaths Network. Its approach is based on an important idea. Many deaths associated with disaster are potentially avoided through prevention, timely intervention, effective healthcare, and preparedness and better risk governance. So these are very much important aspects.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Pathak, for your valuable perspective on this issue.